You can almost hear the rustling of dry leaves in the early autumn wind, how it echoes through the desolate canyon, kind of mingling with the soft chirping of insects out in the darkness. Pale moonlight filters down through the treetops, and it's casting these eerie beams of light across the ground that's just littered with leaves and broken branches. And then, from a distance, comes the rumble of a heavy truck, entering this really remote area. You can hear its tires crunching over the gravel and the hard-packed earth. The engine stops, and what's left behind is just this eerie silence. Then you hear eye-heavy footsteps thudding against the ground, followed by hurried breathing, and then the sound of something heavy being dragged across the leafy forest floor. After that, everything just falls quiet. Only the wind whispering through the trees remained. It was as if the wilderness itself was bearing silent witness to a dark secret that had just been buried there. I mean, no one could have guessed that this wild, tranquil place would become the final piece in a heartbreaking criminal puzzle. That this would be the place that buried the dreams and hopes of a young woman whose life was cut far, far too short. Before we begin, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? And what's the weather like? Oh, and one more thing. What case do you want me to cover next? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe. Alright, enough talk. Let's get into it. So let's go to the 25th of August, 2020. It was an ordinary late summer day in Tacoma, Washington. But it would become the first day of a long nightmare for the family and friends of Cassandra Contrello. At 33 years old, Cassandra, or Cassie, as she was known to the people who loved her, was a really vibrant woman, known for her radiant smile and this sort of unshakable optimism. She worked at a local grocery store and was by all accounts well liked by her coworkers for her enthusiastic personality and her willingness to help others. That fateful morning, Cassandra texted her best friend, a woman named Angie Nyberg, to share some astonishing news. She was pregnant. This was especially joyful news for Cassandra, who, had previously struggled with fertility because of some health issues. She had a plan to go shopping that day to prepare for an upcoming Labor Day party. That was where she intended to share the news with her family and loved ones. But Cassandra, she never made it to the store. After her last message to Angie, she just seemed to vanish into thin air. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and all of her messages went unanswered. And this was entirely out of character for Cassandra, who was known to reply to calls and texts almost immediately. So, when a full day passed with no word from her, Angie started to get concerned. She reached out to Marie Smith, Cassandra's mother, to ask if she had maybe heard from her daughter. Marie, wasn't too worried at first. She thought perhaps Cassandra was just busy or maybe needed some personal time. But as night fell, and there was still no word, a creeping sense of fear began to take hold. The next day, when Cassandra failed to show up for work and still remained out of contact, Marie decided it was time to call the police. So, she went to the Pierce County Sheriff's Department to report her daughter missing.
Turns her phone off. She just doesn't. And she wouldn't stop all of her social interactions. It doesn't make any sense. Something has happened.
She brought along recent photos of Cassandra and shared every little detail she could think of that might help them in their search. At first, the police treated it like a pretty routine missing person case. It's not totally unheard of for adults to voluntarily go off the grid, and a lot of times they come back within a few days. But as the officers started to look a little deeper into Cassandra's life, some red flags began to pop up. For one, she hadn't taken any money out of her bank account, she hadn't used her credit cards at all, and she'd left all of her personal belongings right there at her home. What was more troubling, though, was the complete break in communication. I mean, this was highly unusual for someone known to be so social and in constant contact with her family and friends. In the days that followed, Cassandra's family and friends organized search parties. They plastered flyers all across Tacoma and the surrounding areas. And they created social media groups to try and raise awareness about her disappearance. In their posts, they gave a detailed description of Cassandra. She was about 5'7", weighed around 120 pounds, and had dark brown hair with bright brown eyes.
We're relying on is what people feel inside. We're relying on all those people out there who have daughters.
In all the photos they shared, her radiant smile was really her most striking feature. a smile her loved ones were starting to fear they might never see in person again. The first major break in the investigation came on the 28th of August. This was 3 days after Cassandra had vanished. That's when police found her red Chevrolet Cruze abandoned in a parking lot near the Tacoma Dome, which was a good 10 miles or so from her house. The car was locked, and it didn't show any signs of a forced entry or any kind of struggle. But what really puzzled investigators was the location. You see, Cassandra had no known reason to be there. None of her friends or family knew of any plans she had to go to that area. So, investigators secured the scene and did a really thorough forensic examination of the vehicle. They collected fingerprints, DNA samples, and anything else that might give them some clues about where Cassandra was. Inside the car,
if she is still alive, we want to find her. Unfortunately, we haven't found her, and that's why we're working this as a homicide investigation until something tells us differently. And I hope that day comes.
They found her purse. And inside that was her wallet, her ID, and other personal items. But her cell phone was missing, and that was a crucial detail. It suggested she hadn't just walked away from her life. Meanwhile, investigators started interviewing everyone close to Cassandra, her mother, her friends, her coworkers, and any recent romantic contacts. From them, they learned that Cassandra didn't seem to have any enemies, and she hadn't shown any signs of being afraid or in distress in the days before she disappeared. Actually, it was quite the opposite. According to her friend Angie and others, she seemed especially cheerful and really optimistic about the future, mostly because of her pregnancy. A review of Cassandra's phone records showed that her very last known communication was that text message to Angie on the morning of the 25th of August. After that, the phone either died or was turned off. But data from her mobile service provider revealed something interesting. The final signal from her phone came from an area near Puget Sound, which is that large body of water that borders Tacoma and Seattle. This led to a new search effort focused on the coastline around Puget Sound. It involved the police, Coast Guard units, and a lot of volunteers. On the 1st of September, that effort paid off. A coastal patrol team discovered Cassandra's cell phone. It had been discarded on a small beach off Ruston Way, not too far from Puget Sound. The phone was damaged by water, but the forensic specialists were hopeful they could still recover some data from it. The discovery really intensified the investigators' concerns. The fact that her car and her phone had been found in 2 separate, distant locations from her home. It just suggested that this was not a voluntary disappearance. At this point, all signs were pointing to foul play, and the case officially shifted from a missing persons report to a potential criminal investigation. As detectives dug deeper into Cassandra's personal life and her relationships, one name kept coming up: Colin Dudley. Dudley, who was 37, was an ex-boyfriend of Cassandra's from way back in 2006, and although their romantic relationship had ended years ago, they had apparently kept in sporadic contact. At first, Dudley was just treated as one of many people who might have information. Detectives approached him mainly to see if he knew anything about Cassandra's plans or where she might be. In his initial interview, Dudley seemed cooperative, but he insisted he hadn't seen or spoken to Cassandra in months. He said they weren't close anymore and really had no reason to be in touch. Dudley offered a pretty simple alibi too. He claimed he was home alone on the day Cassandra disappeared, just doing chores around his house and resting. However, when investigators reviewed Cassandra's phone records, a major inconsistency popped up. It turned out that she and Dudley had actually exchanged numerous calls and texts in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. In fact, their last contact was just 1 day before she vanished. So, when they confronted him with this information in a follow-up interview, Dudley changed his story. He admitted that, okay, yes, they had spoken, but he still denied seeing her recently. Dudley's conflicting statements obviously raised suspicions, and investigators began to focus on him much more closely. They started delving into his past relationship with Cassandra and learned that even though their romance had ended years earlier, Dudley seemed to still feel this kind of strong attachment to her. Some of Cassandra's friends described him as having been possessive and controlling when they were together, and even after their breakup, he would occasionally show up unannounced at her home or her workplace. Then, a critical clue emerged when investigators reviewed surveillance footage from a camera near where Cassandra's car had been found. The footage, from a nearby business, showed a man who matched Dudley's build parking her car at that site around 4:45 p.m. on the 25th of August, just hours after Cassandra went missing. Now, the video quality wasn't clear enough for a definitive identification, but the man's height, his build, and the clothes he was wearing all matched descriptions of Dudley. Based on all of these findings, investigators were able to get a search warrant for Dudley's property, which included his Ford F-150 pickup truck and his home in the suburbs of Tacoma. During the search, they didn't find any direct physical evidence that linked him to Cassandra, but they did seize his cell phone, his computer, and the truck's black boxa device that records data on the vehicle's movements and locations. The analysis of the data from this device, well, it provided a breakthrough. Contrary to Dudley's claims, his truck was not at his home all day on the 25th of August. Instead, the data showed it had traveled to a remote area near Chambers Creek Road, which is a wooded region about 8 miles west of Dudley's house. The vehicle stayed at that location for about an hour before it returned to Dudley's house. And what's more, the data also showed that the truck had passed through an area near where Cassandra's phone was later found in Puget Sound. So when investigators confronted him with this new information, Dudley once again changed his story. This time, he admitted to meeting with Cassandra on the day she disappeared. He claimed that she had come to his house to talk about maybe rekindling their relationship. According to Dudley's new story, they had a short conversation. She left peacefully, and he had no idea what happened to her after that. But he couldn't explain why his truck had been in the Chambers Creek Road area or near Puget Sound that day. The ongoing inconsistencies in Dudley's statements, combined with the data from his truck and that security footage, finally provided enough evidence to get an arrest warrant. On the 8th of September, 2 weeks after Cassandra vanished, Colin Dudley was taken into custody for further questioning about her disappearance. But they didn't yet have enough evidence to charge him with a specific crime. Investigators knew they needed to find Cassandra, or at least find direct evidence of what happened to her to really move the case forward. With the new information about Dudley's trip to the Chambers Creek Road area, investigators organized a large-scale search in that wooded region. The terrain was vast and the landscape was difficult. I mean, there were rocky slopes, narrow ravines, and really dense vegetation, which made the search extremely challenging. The search, team made up of police officers, rescue workers, volunteers, and cadaver dogs, spent several days combing through the area, focusing on the points that matched the GPS data from Dudley's truck. In the early days, though, the search didn't yield any results. There were no signs of Cassandra, no evidence related to her disappearance. Meanwhile, the forensic investigators were still analyzing the evidence from her car and her cell phone. And although the phone had been damaged by water, the tech experts were actually able to recover some of the data, including her message history and location tracking. This data confirmed that the phone had traveled from Cassandra's home to Dudley's house on the morning of the 25th of August, then to the Chambers Creek Road area, and finally to Puget Sound, where it was thrown away. This data aligned perfectly with the GPS from Dudley's truck.
Well, they were at this home and several other locations in Pierce County, but as of tonight, 5 o'clock, detectives say they still do not know what happened to Cassandra Cantrell,
which just further reinforced his connection to Cassandra's disappearance. The forensic examination of Cassandra's car also revealed several other crucial clues. Technicians discovered small traces of blood on the inside door handle, and they found several strands of hair on the back seat that would later match Cassandra's DNA. On top of all that, Dudley's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel and the rearview mirror. This, despite his earlier denial that he had recently driven her car. As the search around Chambers Creek Road kept going, investigators also dug deeper into Dudley's past and his relationship with Cassandra. And they discovered that in the weeks right before her disappearance, Dudley had purchased several suspicious items, things like rope, rubber gloves, and industrial-strength cleaning chemicals. These purchases were all made with his credit card at a local hardware store, and they were even captured on the store's security cameras. Information from Cassandra's friends and co-workers also started to paint a pretty troubling picture. Many of them described how, even though Cassandra and Dudley had broken up a long time ago, he still had a habit of showing up in her life unannounced, and he would get really upset whenever she dated other people. One of Cassandra's co-workers remembered an incident just a few weeks before she disappeared. Dudley had come into her workplace and started a heated argument with her, accusing her of being unfaithful and lying to him about something. Then, on the 22nd of September, nearly a month after Cassandra went missing, the tireless search finally led to a breakthrough. A search team was working in this narrow, hard-to-reach ravine west of Chambers Creek Road. And there, beneath a large rock, they discovered an object. It was wrapped in a blanket and duct tape. When investigators opened the package, they found the remains of a woman. She was later confirmed through DNA testing to be Cassandra Cantrell. The initial autopsy revealed her cause of death was asphyxiation by strangulation. The signs indicated that Cassandra had died on the day she disappeared, or very shortly after, and that her body had been hidden in that remote ravine in a clear attempt to keep her from being discovered. The location where her remains were found, it matched the GPS data from Dudley's truck on the 25th of August, which just further solidified his connection to the case. With this discovery, investigators now had enough evidence to formally charge Colin Dudley with first-degree murder. He was arrested again, this time on official charges, and was held without bail to wait for his trial. Over the next several months, the Pierce County prosecutors worked to build a solid case against him. And while a lot of the evidence was circumstantial, the combination of all the different elements, the truck's location, the phone data, the security footage, Dudley's conflicting stories, and especially the location of Cassandra's body, it all formed a really compelling picture of his guilt. The lead prosecutor, Mary Thompson, worked closely with investigators to uncover even more evidence and testimony that could strengthen their case. They conducted another, more thorough search of Dudley's home, looking for anything that might connect him to Cassandra's death. During this second search, investigators found several notable items. In his garage, they discovered a roll of duct tape that was identical to the one used to wrap Cassandra's body. And in the trash out behind his house, they found some recently washed clothing that even so still had traces of a liquid they believed to be blood. Later, DNA testing confirmed that the blood on that clothing matched Cassandra's DNA. On top of that, an examination of Dudley's computer revealed a really disturbing search history. In the weeks before Cassandra disappeared, he had searched for topics like how to make someone disappear, blind spots in Tacoma's surveillance cameras, and how long DNA lasts outside. And most notably, he also searched for things like fake pregnancy in women, and how to tell if someone is lying about being pregnant. These were searches that seemed directly connected to Cassandra's claim that she was pregnant. Investigators also spoke to people who knew Dudley, like his co-workers and neighbors. Many of them described him as a quiet, kind of withdrawn man, but one who was also prone to these occasional, unpredictable bursts of anger. One co-worker recalled that in the weeks before Cassandra disappeared, Dudley had become more irritable than usual. He would often complain about a woman he claimed was trying to ruin his life. The co-worker! He hadn't realized Dudley was talking about Cassandra until the news of her disappearance came on television. Another critical factor in the case was establishing a motive. Why would Dudley want to kill Cassandra? Through the investigation, a likely scenario started to take shape. Based on messages and emails they recovered from Cassandra's phone and computer, investigators believed she had told Dudley about her pregnancy, and possibly told him that he was the father. Dudley, who had a stable life with a new job and a new, though apparently unofficial and undisclosed relationship, he may have seen this news as a threat. Messages between Cassandra and a close friend showed that she had tried to talk to Dudley about the pregnancy over and over in the weeks before she vanished, but he just consistently avoided the conversation. In a message she sent just days before she disappeared, Cassandra expressed her frustration. She said Dudley refused to accept responsibility and that she would be forced to pursue legal action to make sure she had support for the child. Prosecutors believe this could have been the catalyst. If Cassandra really was pregnant with his child and was determined to take him to court for support, it could have created enough pressure to push him towards violence. And the autopsy did confirm that Cassandra was in the early stages of pregnancy, estimated at about 6 to 8 weeks. That was consistent with the timeline she had shared with her friends. With all of this evidence, in November 2020, Colin Dudley was officially charged with aggravated first-degree murder. He was now facing the possibility of life in prison without parole if he was convicted. He continued to deny all the charges and hired an experienced defense attorney, getting ready for a legal battle. Dudley's trial was initially scheduled for early 2022, but it ended up facing multiple delays because of legal issues, procedural stuff, and also the impact the COVID-19 pandemic was having on the court system. While they were waiting, Cassandra's family and friends continued to advocate, making sure the case wouldn't be forgotten. They held memorials, they spoke to the media, and they maintained a presence on social media to keep Cassandra's story alive in the public eye. Marie Smith, Cassandra's mother, became the most vocal advocate for her daughter. In many interviews, she would describe Cassandra as this vibrant, passionate, and loving woman who was always ready to help other people. She said she had a special ability to make people laugh, even in tough situations. Marie really emphasized that Cassandra had been absolutely thrilled about her pregnancy and had already started making plans for her future with the Bobby, a future she never got to live. In April of 2022, nearly 2 years after Cassandra's disappearance, Colin Dudley's trial finally began at the Pierce County Superior Court. The courtroom was packed. Cassandra's friends and family were there, along with reporters and concerned members of the community who had been following this widely publicized case. In the opening statements, prosecutor Mary Thompson painted a very clear picture of Dudley's actions. According to her, Dudley lured Cassandra to his house on the 25th of August, 2020, possibly with the promise that they would discuss her pregnancy. There, she said, he killed her, most likely through strangulation, and then transported her body to that remote ravine at Chambers Creek Road. After that, he returned, took Cassandra's car to the Tacoma Dome, and abandoned it, and then, on his way home, he discarded her phone in Puget Sound. Dudley's defense team, which was led by a veteran attorney named Richard Brennan, focused on casting doubt on all the circumstantial evidence. They argued that, sure, while Dudley may have seen Cassandra on the day she disappeared, there was no direct evidence that proved he was the one who caused her death. They even suggested that someone else might have harmed Cassandra after she left Dudley's home, and that if Dudley did have any role in moving or hiding the body, it was only because he was panicking, not because he was guilty of killing her. The defense team also tried to question how reliable the technical evidence was, things like the GPS data from Dudley's truck and the location information from Cassandra's cell phone. They argued that the data could be inaccurate, or that it was possibly being misinterpreted. But as the trial went on, the strength of the evidence against Dudley just became more and more clear. Expert witnesses from the FBI and local law enforcement agencies provided detailed testimony on exactly how the location data and the forensic evidence were collected and analyzed. They explained that the likelihood of all of these different elements, from the GPS data to the DNA and the security footage all matching up randomly without being connected to the crime, was just extremely low. The testimony from Dr. Emily Crawford was particularly compelling. She was an expert in vehicle GPS tracking devices, and she explained in detail how the black box in Dudley's truck had accurately recorded the vehicle's movements. The data showed that the truck had stopped for about 47 minutes, precisely at the location where Cassandra's body was found on the day she went missing. Then, it moved to the area near the Tacoma Dome where her car was found, and finally, to the Puget Sound area where her phone was discarded. A really critical moment in the trial came when Prosecutor Thompson presented Dudley's internet search history in front of the entire courtroom. She displayed this list of disturbing searches that Dudley had conducted in the weeks before Cassandra disappeared. Things like destroy DNA, surveillance camera, blind spots, and fake pregnancy. You know, these searches, when combined with the purchases of rope and cleaning chemicals, painted a picture of someone who had meticulously planned his actions. After 2 weeks of evidence and arguments, the case took an unexpected turn. Faced with this mountain of evidence against his client, Dudley's attorney Brennan approached Prosecutor Thompson to talk about the possibility of a plea deal. And after several hours of negotiations, they reached an agreement. Dudley would plead guilty to first-degree murder, and in return, the prosecutor would not seek the maximum sentence of life without parole. On the 28th of April, 2022, Colin Dudley formally pled guilty to the murder of Cassandra Cantrell. In his statement to the court, he admitted to luring Cassandra to his home to talk about her pregnancy and then, in what he called a sudden fit of rage, strangling her to death. He said he then tried to cover up his crime by hiding her body in that remote ravine and getting rid of her car and phone in different locations to try and confuse investigators. Judge Michael Rodriguez sentenced Dudley to 26 years in prison, with the possibility of a parole review after he serves his term. While it wasn't the maximum possible sentence, it did ensure that Dudley would spend the majority of his life behind bars. And, more importantly, it provided a sense of closure to Cassandra's family without them having to go through a longer and more painful trial. The response to Dudley's sentencing within the community, and especially from Cassandra's family, was, well, it was complex.
He definitely deserves the death penalty twice over.
While there was relief that justice had finally been served, there was also a lot of anger and frustration that Dudley was allowed to accept a plea deal instead of facing a full trial and a potentially harsher sentence. Marie Smith, in an emotional statement after the trial, expressed her mixed feelings. Although she was grateful that the case had been resolved, that Cassandra's body had been found and could be properly laid to rest, she still felt that 26 years was not enough for someone who had taken the life of her daughter and her unborn grandchild. She described the pain of knowing that Cassandra had lost the chance to ever become a mother, something she had wanted for so long. Angie Nyberg, Cassandra's best friend and the last person to get a message from her about the pregnancy, also expressed her outrage over the plea deal. She believed Dudley's actions were carefully premeditated and that he deserved the full weight of the law. She went on to establish a memorial fund in Cassandra's name to support victims of domestic violence and struggling single mothers away to honor her lost friend in a way she believed Cassandra would have wanted. Prosecutor Mary Thompson defended the decision to accept the plea deal. She explained that although the evidence against Dudley was strong, there was still a risk that a jury might not convict him of the highest degree of murder just because so much of the evidence was circumstantial. By securing a long and certain sentence through a plea agreement, the prosecution made sure Dudley would be held accountable, without the risk of an acquittal or a lesser conviction. The Cassandra Cantrell case had a really profound impact on the Tacoma community. It raised a lot of awareness about domestic violence and the potential dangers of staying in contact with former partners who show possessive or controlling behavior. Several local organizations even used the case to strengthen their educational programs, which were aimed at helping people recognize the early warning signs of dangerous behavior and know how to get help when they need it. For the Pierce County Police Department, the case became a textbook example of the value of modern technology in criminal investigations. The use of GPS data from the truck, the cell phone analysis, and the discovery of that internet search history, it all played a key role in building the case against Dudley. The department has since used the lessons from this case to improve training for their investigators on how to use and interpret these types of digital evidence. A year after the trial, on the 25th of August, 2023, a special memorial was held for Cassandra in a Tacoma park. Hundreds of people showed up, family, friends, and even strangers who had been touched by her story. The ceremony included the release of purple balloons, which was Cassandra's favorite color. Each one had a personal message attached to it and a flower seed, symbolizing the growth and hope that can emerge even from the most tragic circumstances. During the ceremony, Marie Smith announced the founding of the Cassandra Cantrell Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to supporting pregnant women in crisis and providing resources to those who are trying to escape dangerous relationships. The foundation quickly gained support from the local community with donations from businesses and individuals who were moved by Cassandra's story, for Cassandra's loved ones, the healing process. It continues. While nothing can bring her back or completely erase the pain of her loss, just knowing that the person responsible was brought to justice has brought them some measure of closure. They continue to honor her legacy by living according to the values she held dear: kindness, generosity, and the ability to find joy even in the darkest of times. And Cassandra Cantrell's story continues to inspire efforts to improve the legal system and the safety nets for vulnerable individuals. In a major development in 2023, the Washington State Legislature passed the Cassandra Act, a law that strengthens protections for pregnant women who are facing violence or threats from current or former partners. As time passes, the details of the criminal case might fade from our collective memory, but Cassandra Cantrell's legacy, that lives on. It lives on in the lives she touched, in the people helped by the foundation that bears her name, and in the positive changes to the system that were inspired by her tragic story. In her death, she became a symbol of the urgent need to recognize and confront domestic violence. And a reminder that behind every headline about a murder, there's a real person who is deeply loved, with hopes and dreams and a potential that was never realized. In the quiet nights at the ravine where Cassandra was found, some say the wind still whispers through the trees, carrying the echoes of a life cut too short. But now, maybe that whisper also carries another message. A promise that from tragedy, there can be change. From grief, there can be purpose. And from the saddest stories, hope can rise for a future where deaths like Cassandra's become less common, because we learn to recognize the warning signs and to intervene before it's too late.